Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are strapping in for what feels like the ultimate shortcut. We're going to try to cut a path through the intentional complexity of campaign finance law.
It really is intentional.
Absolutely. Our mission here isn't to read you a textbook. It's to cut through all the jargon, bypass the super dull disclosure forms, and really reveal the actual architecture, the plumbing, if you will.
The plumbing is a great way to put it.
Yeah, the plumbing that allows these vast, just unprecedented sums of private wealth to legally enter and shape U.S. elections.
And it is such an essential deep dive because the very mechanics of how this political money flows, or as we're going to show today, how it kind of explodes across the landscape, it's all designed very consciously to make your eyes glaze over.
Right.
The language is obtuse, the deadlines feel completely arbitrary, and the legal structures are deliberately complex. So we had to start by understanding that architecture, then we can trace the history of how all these loopholes were carved out, and then finally we get to see what that influence actually buys.
And we are going to start with a case that is just the perfect, almost cynical illustration of this whole system at work. It's a mystery that only cracked open for the public after the ballots were all counted. We're talking about the vanishing ad, a $20 million campaign paid for by a phantom PAC.
A phantom PAC called RBG PAC?
Yes, RBG PAC.
And the absurdity of that name is your first and really your most immediate flag. RBG, of course, stands for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the iconic, recently deceased liberal Supreme Court justice.
Right.
So using that name, it immediately suggests deliberate obfuscation. It's like they're trying to throw anyone tracking the money completely off the scent. This PAC was anything but liberal. It was a right-wing, pro-Trump vehicle.
So in the critical final weeks of the 2024 election, specifically throughout October, a video supporting Donald Trump ran very, very widely. They spent heavily on it.
Heavily is an understatement. They dropped $20 million on digital platforms like Facebook and Instagram, but the spending wasn't, just a general blast. It was hyper-targeted.
This is where the calculation really, really shines through. They spent about $350,000 of that total budget, showing a very specific version of the ad, primarily to a really narrow demographic.
And that was women under the age of 74 in crucial swing states. We're talking about the razor-thin margins in Pennsylvania, Michigan, North Carolina, and Wisconsin.
And the message itself was just ruthlessly calculated to neutralize a key Democratic advantage. The ad specifically argued that, life was better under Trump when he was president. It focused on economic anxieties, and crucially, it highlighted his public stance that he did not support a federal national abortion ban.
It was an extremely surgical piece of political communication, just designed to peel off a very specific set of skeptical voters in the final stretch.
And if you were tracking this ad campaign in real time, you would have seen the little disclosure line, paid for by RBG PAC. So if you looked into the official Federal Election Commission paperwork during the election itself to find out who funded this massive $20 million push,
you would have hit a total dead end.
A brick wall.
The initial public paperwork, filed during that critical October window, it only listed the PAC-lea's treasurer, a prominent Republican lawyer, and Fox News guest named May Mailman. But the paperwork showed $0 in receipts. They reported the spending, but the source of the funding was completely hidden.
And this is where the federal regulation loophole just comes into crystal clear focus. It's this key piece of timing that makes post-election transparency the norm for last-minute, maximum impact spending.
Exactly. The rule states that any money received by a PAC league after October 16th, so just a few weeks before Election Day, it doesn't have to be disclosed until December.
A full month after the election has been decided.
It's an intentional delay built right into the system.
So the ad ran, the money was spent, the election happened, and only then, in the cold light of December, did RBG PAC have to file its complete disclosure. And that revelation was a true blockbuster. It confirmed the ultimate source of that $20 million.
The paperwork revealed the donor was the Elon Musk Revocable Trust.
Right. And what is that exactly?
It's a personal legal entity. A kind of financial vehicle that's often used for asset protection, for tax purposes, and for holding major assets like his Tesla stock. Using a trust, rather than his personal name directly, just adds another layer of financial distance and complexity.
So this trust was the conduit who used to fund that entire $20 million ad campaign?
It was, and it's the perfect illustration of that intentional delay. Using the narrow timing loophole, operating through these legally distanced entities, all of it was executed perfectly legally, thanks to the system we're about to unpack.
But we have to zoom out here and put that 20 million into the necessary context, because that was just one check to one temporary PAC.
Absolutely. While 20 million funded that specific surgical PAC, the total amount spent by Elon Musk on the election cycle was a record-setting $290 million.
290 million.
That is the largest documented individual contribution to a single election cycle in U.S. history. When you grasp that scale, you realize this isn't just a contribution, it's an economic force. It's equivalent to the GDP of a small country.
And once that disclosure was finally made and the election outcome was finalized, the structure itself performed its final act.
Right. RBGPIC was immediately dissolved, the website was deleted, and all the social media accounts were scrubbed clean.
It was like a pop-up shop for political influence.
That's a perfect analogy. It was a purpose-built, temporary structure designed for maximum targeted influence and then immediate disappearance. It's the ultimate example of bespoke political weaponry.
But to understand how that weaponry was built, and more importantly, why it was perfectly legal for one individual to wield that much financial power, we have to rewind.
We do. We have to go back about 50 years. We have to go back to the 1970s, before any of these modern unlimited channels, these vast funnels, even existed.
We're traveling back to the foundational moment of our current campaign finance structure. Before this, corporate money in politics was technically legal, but the enforcement was really lax, and the system was just utterly opaque. The wealthy could influence things, but it was often through, illicit or back-channel means.
And this is where we need to introduce the man who really laid the intellectual and legal groundwork for the corporate pushback, Lewis Powell.
The Powell Memo.
Exactly. In 1971, Powell was an elite corporate lawyer known for defending tobacco companies, among others. And he penned this foundational manifesto, which has since become known as the Powell Memo, and he addressed it to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
And this wasn't some dry policy paper. It was a deeply paranoid, existential call to arms.
It really was. Powell argued that American capitalism and, by extension, individual freedom were under a sustained aggressive attack from activist groups, consumer advocates, environmentalists.
He saw people like Ralph Nader and the whole consumer safety movement as these fundamental threats that needed to be neutralized through political action.
His diagnosis was that corporations were losing the political battle because they were only reacting, they weren't being proactive. He said they needed to stop playing defense and start using their political power aggressively, with determination, and with sustained financial resources.
And what was his key tactical advice? The recommendation that would end up being so eerily prophetic.
He urged American business to assemble a highly competent, well-funded staff of lawyers, specifically to engage the Supreme Court. He was essentially anticipating and recommending that corporate interests fight legal battles designed to reshape the entire political and economic sphere in their favor.
The historical irony here is just impossible to ignore.
It is. Within a few months of writing this detailed memo urging corporate interests to challenge policy in the highest court, Lewis Powell was appointed to the Supreme Court.
By President Richard Nixon.
By Nixon. The very person urging corporate engagement with the highest court was now one of the 9 justices sitting on it, ready to hear those very challenges.
Speaking of Nixon, his re-election campaign is precisely what brought this whole corrupt system crashing down, which led to the first major attempt at reform.
The Watergate scandal.
The Watergate scandal in 1972 revealed that illegal secret campaign contributions financed this vast operation of illegal tactics.
And the corruption wasn't subtle at all. Major corporations were basically hit up for at least $100,000 each. The campaign finance was completely illicit and often disguised. We have these detailed reports from the era describing executives passing funds in paper bags filled with cash.
Cash in paper bags.
And multinational companies like American Airlines were routing money through overseas banks, specifically a bank in Lebanon, just to hide where the contribution was coming from.
It was just a shocking display of institutional failure. It completely destroyed public trust. Nixon ultimately resigned, and Congress had to confront this reality that the entire scheme, the political surveillance, the break-ins, the obstruction of justice, all of it was enabled by an excess of campaign donations, many of them secret and illicitly obtained.
So the response was pretty definitive. The goal of the 1970s reforms was explicitly to end the corrosive and corrupting influence of private money in public life. Congress knew that a system defined by secret cash payments and corporate leverage just had to be stopped. They targeted 3 areas: enforcement, transparency, and limits.
They created the Federal Election Commission, the FEC, specifically to enforce these new, strict rules. And this is where we can establish that metaphor of the money pipes. It's really the easiest way for you to visualize how campaign finance is supposed to work.
Imagine the system as plumbing, right? Money flows from individuals, that's the source, to candidates or parties, and then it flows out toward campaign activities, that's the destination, like ads or rallies.
And Congress established absolute transparency for all these flows. Every transaction was now public, disclosed in paperwork that the FEC published. And this reform, it was effective. It's the mechanism that eventually allowed us to uncover the identity of the RBG PAC donor, even with that timing loophole.
But the real target was influence. To prevent corruption, they made the pipes that allowed giving money directly to candidates and parties super narrow.
So individuals, no matter how rich they were, had the exact same donation limit as everyone else.
Right. It was originally set at $1,000, which today is roughly $7,000. And critically, they made sure that corporations and unions remained entirely barred from spending money directly in elections.
The whole system was intended to maximize transparency and equality. It was designed to ensure that while everyone could participate, no single wealthy entity, whether an individual or a corporation, could wield overwhelming financial leverage over a politician through direct financial contributions.
This is a real, genuine effort to separate wealth from political influence.
But the wealthy, the corporations, and our fictional donor, they were outraged. The system was too narrow, too transparent, and they felt it censored their ability to project influence that was commensurate with their economic power.
And that frustration, that feeling of censorship, is exactly what led to the system being challenged in court almost immediately.
That's right. The resistance wasn't subtle at all. It was highly organized and very well funded. Wealthy business interests felt that these strict limits, particularly the limits on spending money to publish their political views, amounted to a direct infringement on the First Amendment.
They argued that money spent on speech is speech.
And this argument, framed as this noble fight for free speech, was bankrolled by rich business interests, free speech advocates, and conservative lawmakers. The resources for this specific litigation, which was designed to overturn the new laws, were vast and strategic.
And this legal challenge, which we now know as Buckley v. Valeo, went directly to the Supreme Court. And you have to remember, Lewis Powell, the corporate lawyer who advocated for precisely this type of legal challenge, was now sitting on the court.
So the Supreme Court was instantly receptive to the argument that money used for political communication should be viewed differently than money used simply to buy a politician's vote.
And this is maybe the most significant legal turning point in this entire deep dive. The Supreme Court, in Buckley, created the fundamental distinction that still defines modern campaign finance law.
And what was that?
They ruled that giving money is constitutionally distinct from spending money.
Okay, let's break that down, because that distinction sounds like it's everything.
It is everything. The court accepted that the government is justified in regulating giving money directly to a candidate or a party.
Why?
Because the court recognized that giving massive checks can lead to corruption, or, just as importantly, the appearance of corruption.
The classic quid pro quo exchange.
Exactly. If you give $100,000 to a politician, it creates a sense that they owe you a favor. It looks like you're buying access or favors. Therefore, limits on direct giving are permissible under the Constitution. The narrow pipes for donations survived.
But then they turned their attention to the spending pipes, the money spent independently on political communication, like producing an ad.
And here is where the pipe just burst wide open. The court made the very controversial claim that independent spending cannot be regulated. Their reasoning was this: if you spend your own money independently on an ad supporting a candidate, that expenditure is too distant to be considered corrupting.
So the candidate, according to the court's logic, doesn't owe you a favor just because you ran an ad telling the public to vote for them.
Right. Therefore, if independent spending doesn't lead to corruption, then restricting it is regulating speech itself.
Wait, I have to stop you there. This entire legal framework seems to rest on this massive and, you could argue, pretty naive assumption that spending millions on an independent ad campaign doesn't create a sense of profound indebtedness or obligation from the politician to the wealthy sender.
Good.
I mean, given the examples we started with, like the $290 million donor gaining access to the government's checkbook, isn't that entire foundational legal argument now, empirically broken?
That is the core paradox of modern campaign finance. The court's logic in Buckley relies entirely on the premise that independent spending is inherently pure. They stated, and I'm quoting here, "The quantity of communication is relevant to the expression of ideas." They elevated political spending to a basic constitutional right.
Equating regulating the money spent on communicating political views with censoring speech in America.
Exactly. And once they defined political spending as speech, they essentially made it immune from restriction.
So the immediate result of Buckley was the creation of this kind of schizophrenic system. The direct giving pipe stayed narrow. You could only give a few $1,000s to a candidate, but the independent spending pipes were now, quote, as large as you want them to be.
And that decision made it perfectly legal for individuals to spend unlimited amounts of their own money on advertising to support a candidate, provided, and this is key, that they acted entirely independently of the campaign.
It was the beginning of the end for that simple, transparent system established after Watergate.
It meant that while you couldn't directly buy a candidate through one massive donation, you could spend unlimited millions trying to elect them independently, effectively purchasing the election result itself.
But the new system was full of these contradictions. Even with unlimited spending now legalized, the wealthy donors still faced two problems. First, they often weren't campaign experts who knew how to produce professional ads.
Right.
And second, and crucially, even this unlimited independent spending was still transparent. If you paid for an ad, the disclosure requirements meant your name was still attached to it. And the wealthy still didn't love having their names publicly linked to massive political spending.
Correct. But they didn't have to wait very long for the next set of legal and linguistic loopholes to emerge. The system was now unbalanced, and political operatives and corporate interests immediately started poking holes in the boundaries.
So we jump ahead to the 1990s.
The 90s, where they discovered a linguistic loophole to get around both the limits and the transparency requirements. They focused entirely on exploiting the distinction between issue advocacy and campaign spending.
This is the infamous era of the magic words loophole.
That's right. Unlimited money started flowing into something called issue advocacy ads. These ads would mention a politician by name, say Senator Kenzie is hurting seniors, but they strictly avoided using the specific magic words required to trigger campaign finance regulation.
And what were these magic words?
The specific magic words were defined in law as express advocacy. So phrases like vote for, elect, defeat, cast your ballot against, or support. If an ad avoided those specific trigger phrases, it was deemed issue advocacy, meaning it was just discussing policy, not promoting a campaign outcome.
So a corporate interest could spend $5 million on an ad that said, tell Senator Kenzie to stop hurting Medicare by supporting this reform. And because they didn't say vote against Kenzie, they could pour unlimited, what they called soft money, into it, completely bypassing the strict limits and transparency rules of the FEC.
It was a massive semantic technicality, a huge opening, and corporations immediately wanted to dive in. For 2 decades, they had been entirely barred from direct election spending. Now, they saw this big, fat, unlimited spending channel available, provided they were willing to obscure their source and stick to these carefully worded scripts.
And to solve the transparency problem, which was always the major deterrent for corporate interests, they established middleman corporations with these incredibly generic, positive-sounding names.
Right. Think of the example we cited. An ad might say it was paid for by Citizens for Better Medicare. Sounds great. Sounds like a benign group of seniors. But in reality, that group was funded entirely by pharmaceutical companies terrified of specific regulatory changes.
And this practice established the modern model of using an organization with a vague positive name to funnel hidden corporate and private money into elections, all based on exploiting that magic words loophole.
So by the late 1990s, the system was completely spiraling out of control again. Unlimited corporate and private money was flooding politics through these opaque channels. It was the same kind of corrosive influence Congress had tried to end 2 decades earlier after Watergate.
Which is why, in 2002, we saw this rare, major, bipartisan effort in Congress. It was led by Senators John McCain and Russ Feingold, and their goal was to clean up shop and close these exact loopholes.
They wanted to ban the unlimited soft money flowing through the magic words channel, and to ban corporate spending on election-related media, even if it didn't use the magic words if the ads ran so to an election.
And everyone thought this new law, the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, would finally restore the structure put in place after Watergate. It was seen as the end of the unlimited, opaque money party.
But the wealthy interests, who were now used to wielding this unlimited power, they immediately sued. And this sets the stage for the most transformative and arguably destructive campaign finance decision in modern history.
Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission.
That's the one. The case centered around a specific player, a nonprofit corporation called Citizens United. They produced an anti-Hillary Clinton documentary, about 90 minutes long, during the 2007 election cycle. They wanted to distribute it widely, but the new law banned corporations from airing election-related media too close to an election, even if it was technically issue advocacy.
So they intentionally broke the new rules to trigger a legal challenge.
Exactly. Citizens United sued, arguing that the law prohibiting their documentary was government censorship, violating their First Amendment rights. And the case was argued all the way up to the Supreme Court.
And while Lewis Powell himself was long gone, his spiritual descendants, justices, who shared his core belief that corporations must be allowed to exert maximum political influence, they made up the majority of the court.
The majority of the court in 2010 still fundamentally believed that spending money on a campaign is speech, and that speech cannot be limited by the government, regardless of the source.
And the court ruled 5-4 that the law prohibiting the documentary was, in fact, government censorship. But the justices went far beyond the specific facts of the case.
This was the blockbuster decision that explicitly reversed a century of law, declaring that corporations and unions had the exact same fundamental free speech rights to spend unlimited money in elections as private individuals do.
It was a legal revolution. I mean, the court argued that restricting the political speech of a corporation was akin to restricting the speech of an individual. The identity of the speaker shouldn't diminish their constitutional rights. This effectively opened the floodgates to any corporation, big union, or wealthy entity that wanted to spend money to influence election outcomes.
But here is the critical legal linkage that created the system we see today. The real game changer wasn't just corporate spending, it was the birth of the super PAC. Remember the Buckley precedent. Independent spending is limitless speech and cannot be regulated because it doesn't cause corruption.
So political operatives took that Buckley ruling and they applied it to this new Citizens United world. They conceived of a new type of political action committee, a PAC, that focused only on independent spending and never gave money directly to a candidate.
And the legal question then became, if this new type of PAC only engages in independent spending, the category that the Supreme Court already deemed non-corrupting, should there be a limit on how much money an individual or corporation can give to that new PAC?
And the lower courts quickly answered, ruling that based on the Citizens United precedent and applying the logic of Buckley, there could be no limit on how much an individual, corporation, or union gives to these new groups, as long as the groups didn't formally coordinate their spending with the candidate's campaign.
And that set of legal rulings created the super PAC.
The
name says it all. Unlimited giving from any source to the super PAC, and unlimited spending by the super PAC on campaign activities. This was the moment the scale of private money in politics fundamentally changed forever. The amount of money spent by these organizations just exploded in the first presidential election cycle afterward, and the spending has only increased exponentially ever since.
It truly was the fulfillment of the wealthy donor's dream. Now, individuals like Elon Musk could legally channel massive amounts of money, $290 million in his case, into influencing the election, entirely unconstrained by the limits Congress had tried to put in place after Watergate.
But even with the super PAC, there was still one minor snag.
They still had to disclose their donors.
That's the lingering vestige of the Watergate reforms. If Musk had given $20 million directly to RBG PAC, his name would have appeared on the receipt paperwork shortly after that October 16th deadline passed. And wealthy individuals, especially those running major public companies, they often prefer to keep their political spending private. They want the influence without the accountability or the public scrutiny.
So they perfected the final, most opaque layer, the middleman. They built the ultimate opaque pipe.
And this pipe relies on a specific type of nonprofit corporation, usually a 501c4 group, which is defined as a social welfare organization. These organizations are allowed to engage in political spending, but crucially, their tax status allows them to shield their donors' identities.
Okay, so the money flow is now perfected for maximum influence and maximum obscurity.
Right. Unlimited money flows from the wealthy individual or their revocable trust to the middleman 501c4 nonprofit. The nonprofit then gives unlimited money to the super PAC.
And the result is that the paperwork filed by the super PAC still shows the transaction, but the donor's identity is obscured. All anyone sees on the super PAC disclosure is a massive donation from, Better America, something totally vague.
And this multi-layered architecture allows the original donor to funnel unlimited opaque money into the election, provided only that there is no formal coordination. This is the legal plumbing that allows for the record $290 million spend that we started this deep dive with.
So now that we have meticulously traced how the money gets into the political bloodstream, we have to focus on the truly important question. What does this money actually buy? Because with people operating at this scale, dropping $290 million, it's not charity, it's an investment strategy.
Precisely. We have to move past the rhetoric that this is merely free speech and view it through the lens of return on investment, or ROI. And political campaigns, when you view them this way, have proven to be some of the best, most lucrative investments wealthy individuals can make. They're investing millions to potentially save or gain tens, sometimes hundreds of millions, through specific legislative or policy changes.
Let's go back to the example of Liz and Dick, the box company owners, because it just illustrates the stunning precision of this system. In the 2016 election cycle, they invested around $8 million in various super PACs, specifically supporting one senator running for re-election, and that senator won.
A year later, when Congress was debating a massive change to the tax code, that same senator single-handedly got a very specific, narrowly tailored rule slipped into the tax law right before it was passed. This rule specifically benefited their unique type of business structure, allowing them to deduct certain business expenses they previously couldn't.
And the return on their $8 million investment?
They immediately saved over $40 million on their taxes.
Wow.
That is a massive, immediate ROI. The political spending wasn't general influence. It was a targeted purchase resulting in a specific tailored policy outcome. So it's no surprise they followed that up by investing over $100 million in various super PACs in 2024. The investment works.
And the influence doesn't always come in the form of direct tax loopholes. Sometimes it's about power, prestige, control, the classic spoil system, where large financial contributions buy diplomatic access and high-level appointments.
While the practice of giving donors ambassadorships has been done for generations, the scale and the visibility remains stark, and it persists even when candidates promise to end the practice.
We saw this pattern under the Biden administration, despite campaign promises that, quote, nobody would be appointed based on anything they contributed.
Yet, his ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein was an investment banker who'd given over $3 million to various Democratic committees. And there was nothing in the public record suggesting he had deep diplomatic experience or even spoke the required languages for the posting.
And we see the same pattern repeated with the ambassador to Iceland, who was an attorney who gave $2 million to Democratic groups and others given posts like Malta and Canada. These donors are rewarded with these cushy, high-prestige jobs, reinforcing the system where financial patronage buys status, access, and a place in history, even if their experience is non-existent.
But for the real high-level spenders, it's often not about a 4-year posting in Europe. They want to influence the rules of the entire economic system. They want to shape what policy actually makes it into society, often targeting future industries where they have major investments.
This brings us to the fascinating case of Pete Thiel, the PayPal co-founder and venture capitalist. In 2021, 2 of his former venture capital fund employees were running for the U.S. Senate. They were polling at a dismal 1% in the primaries.
But Thiel recognized the potential policy value of having his former team in positions of power. He swooped in, donating a staggering $10 million to super PACs supporting them. And this immediate injection of funds completely overwhelmed their competitors, putting them instantly on the map.
And one of those men, J.D. Vance, went on to win the Senate seat and eventually became the vice president.
And since his election, Vance has been highly vocal and politically active on Thiel's specific pet issues. Rapid crypto adoption, where Thiel is a major investor, and aggressive AI deregulation.
So while there's no direct evidence of a cash transfer for a vote, the proximity and the alignment are, undeniable. The politician owes a favor, and the politician has the ear of the person who bankrolled their path to power.
And we circle back to Elon Musk, who set the record for individual spending in 2024. That $290 million investment was instantly rewarded with perhaps the highest level of non-cabinet access possible in the incoming administration.
He was rewarded by being appointed to lead the brand new Department of Government Efficiency, or GO.
And this department is not a traditional agency. It promises to act as a wrecking ball to the federal bureaucracy. And crucially, the appointment grants Musk and his handpicked team unparalleled access. Specifically, they now have access to the Treasury Department's entire payment system.
literally the government's checkbook.
Literally the government's checkbook, which handles trillions in transactions. It's the ultimate payoff for a record investment. Unprecedented policy influence, the ability to shape the future structure of the federal government, and access to the inner workings of the U.S. financial system, all secured by spending an unmatched amount of independent money to elect the winning candidate.
And this evidence brings us right back to that core, flawed premise of the Supreme Court's decisions in Buckley and Citizens United. The court asserted repeatedly that independent spending money spent on ads, not given directly to the candidate, could not lead to corruption or the buying of favors.
But the reality we just detailed, the specific tax loopholes, the ambassadorships, the precise policy alignment with donors, the access to the Treasury Department, it suggests the opposite is true. If you spend hundreds of millions of dollars to get a politician elected, they absolutely owe you a favor.
They may not have given you cash in a paper bag, but they have given you influence, policy control, and access. The form of the payment has changed, but the obligation remains.
It's a democracy that allows individuals to translate vastly unequal economic power into vastly unequal political power. And this translation mechanism fundamentally undermines the idea that equality before the law is paramount.
And this isn't just a subjective or, a rhetorical feeling. There is robust, wonky academic research that supports the idea that this system has severely distorted our democracy, making the wealthy the primary, if not sole, drivers of policy.
There was one landmark study that looked at thousands of policy proposals over 2 decades and meticulously charted which proposals passed and whose preferences they matched. The conclusion was stark. Average citizens have little to no influence on the decisions our elected officials ultimately make.
Little to no influence.
The study's most cutting conclusion was this. Regular people often get the policies they favor, but only because those policies also happen to be preferred by economically elite citizens who wield the actual influence.
So in other words, if average people and the wealthy agree on something, it passes. If they disagree,
the wealthy win almost every time.
So we end in this strange, uncomfortable place where the system of unlimited spending, opaque funnels, clear policy payoffs, and unequal influence is all entirely legal. The Supreme Court has ruled this is the legally sanctioned reality of our campaign finance.
It is a legal paradox.
Yeah.
A system that is sanctioned by the highest court in the land, but is almost universally recognized as corrupting by the public. But here is the most astonishing statistic we encountered, one that cuts across the deep political divisions that define modern America.
And despite the seemingly endless disagreements between political parties on everything from culture to economics, there is overwhelming massive consensus on this one issue.
72% of Americans agree that the current system of unlimited spending in politics is not okay.
72%?
That consensus is statistically robust and holds true even when the data is split by political party affiliation. This is one of the very few issues where the vast majority of the electorate, left, right, and center, agrees that the system is fundamentally broken and needs dramatic reform.
But if 72% of the country agrees that the system is problematic, why hasn't anything changed? If the pipes are so clearly corrupted and the flow is so unequal, why does the party continue?
Because the people who benefit most from this opaque, complex system have a few key hopes. First, they hope the public continues to focus all its energy and attention on fighting over what they cynically call stupid stuff.
Cultural wedge issues.
Exactly. Things that distract from the structural plumbing of the system. They want the public to argue about surface issues, not the mechanisms of power.
And second, and perhaps most importantly,
they hope that the intentional jargon, the complexity, the paperwork deadlines, and the legal nuance of campaign finance remains super boring. They hope that the public impulse is simply to glaze over, assume it's too complicated, and ignore the entire architecture we just spent all this time dissecting.
The complexity is a defense mechanism.
It's designed to be confusing so that the system remains unchallenged. The ultimate power move is to make the mechanisms of political power too tedious and dry for the average citizen to engage with.
So, the provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. Resist the impulse to let your eyes glaze over. The knowledge you've gained today about Lewis Powell's initial call to arms, the cynicism of the RBG-PEC, the legal paradox of Buckley, the floodgates of Citizens United, and the opaque funnels, it's the only tool you have to push back against the intentional complexity designed to keep the status quo intact.
Understanding the pipe system is the first essential step toward fixing the flow.